Hello and welcome to Just Onside. It's Friday. It's the 31st of January, end of the month. So payday, which is a relief. Oh, yes, how are you? Are you as happy as me?
Yeah, very well. Friday, never complaining on a Friday. It's been a long week as always. But yeah, looking forward to some football. It is the 31st of January. I think it was my brother's birthday yesterday. Happy 48th. But yeah, doing good. Very well. How about yourself?
Not too bad at all. It's been a decent week. Uh, Much better than recent weeks. So all good. But don't want to get carried away. You know that it can change in an instant. So at the moment, I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to enjoy the weekend and look forward to next week, hopefully being as good as this week. All right, okay, let's talk football. It's been a little while. It's been about sort of a week and a half since we last shot. You've been busting a gut to talk about Michael Oliver, who I think you sort of said he did your boys a bad turn. And it's turned out to be the case because I think the decision has been rescinded. So we'll talk Oliver and we'll talk about referees. It's a bugbear of ours. We're always sort of every now and then having to talk about referees and the incompetence of English referees in particularly. So we'll talk about Oliver first. And then maybe we could talk about David Coote as well, who's been in the news again, trying to make amends for his shenanigans. So take it away, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think I did share my opinions with you on the whole Michael Oliver episode, so you're putting words in my mouth, but
No,
perhaps.
no, no. You wanted to, but we've not had the opportunity. But
Correct,
obviously,
correct.
you have been bursting at the seam to try and talk about Oliver and how he's wronged the Gooners.
The Gooners. Yeah, look, I mean, let's have a balanced conversation about this because it's an important one, isn't it? It flared up again. You said flippantly, in a sense, the referee's incompetence, but let's have a very balanced conversation about this. So you look, we had an incident obviously last week, wasn't it, during the Wolves Arsenal game? I'm the kind of footballing supporter. I don't think I'm as adversarial as the average fan in the sense of I genuinely will call it as I
Mm,
see it, in the sense of if that's pro Arsenal, anti Arsenal, if I see something for United or Liverpool, I try and genuinely call it as I see it because I don't see any value. You just can't get taken seriously if you're always showcasing bias. If Arsenal have some shortcomings, I'll call it out. If I see some strengths from Arsenal, I'll call it out too. The situation I thought with the Wolves Arsenal thing though did get me quite, I would say, quite upset in the sense that look, when the margins are so tight and when you're trying to go for the biggest trophies and the biggest competitions and you're competing, I I've always felt that the most important protagonists in football not are not the fans, are not the managers. It's always the players because without the players, you really don't have anything. Now, us fans like to think the fans are the lifeblood of a football club. And I think that sounds nice and it makes us feel warm and fuzzy inside. But you know as well as I do, the
mm,
sport doesn't exist unless you have elite level sportsmen playing the game at a level that the rest of us mere mortals want to watch. It's an entertainment
mm,
business, right? So I've always thought the integrity of the competition, the fairness of the competition has to be of paramount importance, which is why I always feel that we should be absolutely best endeavoring to arrive at the right decision. So it's one of the reasons why you and I were very aggrieved when everything that happened at the Spurs Stadium, was it last year with the Luis Diaz
mm.
disallowed
Yeah,
goal?
yeah, yeah,
Is
yeah.
You cannot let that level of incompetence and that level of mistake at the highest level happen. This is professional sports, governed and the game is run by professional referees now. So there has to be a certain standard and accountability that we're all striving for, right? I've always felt for the longest time that we've often taken the view that, well, players make mistakes, referees make mistakes, but I think that's just too basic an interpretation to simply wash away that referees' errors, let's say, are just part of the story and part of the narrative. For the longest time, I felt that actually this was perhaps not eradicated or improved, or there wasn't as much emphasis to improve referees' performance because the idea was the more conflict or the more wrong decisions there are in the game, it causes more talking points. The stories keep circulating. The media can get their teeth into something. It's one of the reasons why we still talk about the Maradona handball from 1986. It adds to the lure of, in a sense, the story, even all these years on. However, I have a lot of disdain for that approach. I always take the view, no, you drive, you endeavor to get to the best decision and the correct decision. The challenge I have with the Wolves situation, Ayub, is for a little while now, what we've started to see in the league is referees, and especially with Howard Webb coming out after the games, and they've justified certain decisions using the excuse and the narrative that fits best for that incident. So they'll often say when Michael Oliver fails to send off Kovacic in that famous game against Arsenal for what was clearly two yellow cards,
Hmm.
he gave that famous line, probably an infamous line, that Michael Oliver didn't want to ruin a big game, was the word that Howard Webb used. And I always knew that was going to get him in trouble because fans will cotton on to that and say that when then you have a situation when Trossard's kicking the ball a split second after the whistle's gone, he could have just said, listen, just park it there. But he couldn't wait to get the second yellow. You remember the incident?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He couldn't wait to get the yellow card out and sent him off. I remember the game last year, and again, I'm pretty sure it was Michael Oliver because it stayed in my memory when Dalot was given his marching orders at Anfield in that nil-nil draw last year. Again, very flippantly, couldn't wait with Dalot showing frustration at the decision to get the yellow card out and send him off. The Martinelli incident against Wolves, which is what Arsenal fans feel really aggrieved with a couple of years ago at Wolves, when he got two yellow cards for the same incident. Again, Oliver was very quick to say, no, these are the rules. This is what's happened. What Arsenal fans are saying, rightly or wrongly, is some of the things that have happened to Arsenal this season haven't happened to any other team. The type of red cards they're getting, the type of offences they're being penalised for, hasn't happened to any other team. And I thought you saw another great example of that on Saturday. Now, I was watching it here because obviously 3 o'clock games are televised here, so I have the benefit of watching the 3 o'clock games. Now I'm watching, and from a distance, when you watch it live, you're thinking, okay, he's broken up the play. Now, if you remember, we've had this conversation before. I'm a big proponent, as a rule, that those offences should actually be red cards. Nothing to do with serious foul play. But when you don't have any intention to play the ball whatsoever, because the onus is weighted so, or the benefit is weighted so heavily for the team making the foul, because a yellow card's hardly any real punishment when you think about it. It's one of the reasons why teams are encouraged to break up play with tactical fouls, right? It's because the punishment doesn't fit the crime. So I'm in favor of maybe blue cards. We've spoken about this before. 10 minute sin bin for
Hmm.
for a play, and I think that's where there'd be common ground. Arsenal would think 10 minutes, okay, 10 men, we can live with it. And you'd see over time, you once that punishment is 10 minutes playing without 10 men, or with 10 men, I should say, you'll see teams doing it less, right? You just see teams saying, "I'm not taking that risk because 10 minutes with 10 men is perhaps not the way to go." The thing about Michael Oliver there, though, is, and the whole situation, then I'll let you get your thoughts in and we'll kick it around, is again, he couldn't wait to get the red card out. Now, the best referees we often speak about, batsmen who have that extra second to play the ball, the famous Inzamams or the Rohit
Hmm.
Sharmas or the others we speak about. But we always say the best referees are the ones that just take a moment, evaluate what they've seen. You've heard about situations about witness testimony perhaps being unreliable in certain situations because when you're under duress, and football is it's a stressful
Hmm.
sport, that they say sometimes what you see isn't quite what you saw. It's what you think you saw. And I think often that with referees, the sport's so fast. There was a corner for Arsenal. Suddenly, Wolves are on the counter attack. So things are changing. The dynamic of the flip play, the transition of the play is changing. You're not talking about a systematic attack that's going forward. It's suddenly you're looking towards the penalty box. Now you're having to change direction. See Matt Doherty coming out with the ball. So there's a change of, let's say, rhythm within the play itself. You'd think take a moment, evaluate what you've seen. He could have stopped play given the free kick. He could have even maybe perhaps said to VAR, I'd like to just have another look at that. There's various ways he could have done it. But the fact that he was so quick to get the red card out is very symptomatic of what I've seen from Michael Oliver in recent times in terms of not giving himself a little bit of time just to make an informed judgment. Now, remember, if it was violent conduct, clear violent conduct, VAR could have stepped in anyway and said, oh, just hold it there. We're going to have another look at this. Now, I had to look at one replay. Obviously, I'm not going to pick it up in real time because the camera's zoomed out. But it took me one replay to think, yeah, it's just a cynical foul. What's the issue? I'm not a big fan of freeze frames. You know that. That is absolutely not the right way to judge these things. He was not coming out from a distance with an aggressive intent. So he was just literally next to Doherty. Let's say he just had to change direction, did Miles Lewis Skelly. So this argument that's been used in previous weeks that you've heard, where he's not coming in at pace, he's not in control of his body and all of that. It's a typical cynical foul. You've been watching football for decades, Ayub. So have I. We know a cynical foul when there is one. He's caught him around the ankle. Yes, has his ankle done a small twist? Yeah, but it's not reckless. He's not going to cause serious injury. I don't even think that's a natural consequence of his action, that there could be some serious injury. I don't think the Wolves player has helped, by the way, in writhing down in pain, let's say. But the fact that Michael Oliver's then given that red card, you, and the fact that VAR then, and we'll talk about this perhaps in a second stage, about the standing of Michael Oliver perhaps within the refereeing fraternity having some impact on, again, Darren England, who was the VAR, let's not forget, for that Luis Diaz goal, no goal at Spurs. The fact that his standing within the refereeing fraternity seems to be impacting some of the decision making of his colleagues slash friends. Let's be very clear, that's what they are. They're a group, they tend to stick together, and I can understand that. If you and I often text and exchange and all the rest of it, I'm going to feel some sort of bias towards you. I mean, I think that's just normal human behavior. You wonder, how does that? I mean, they could have easily stepped in and said, Michael, we think you've got that one wrong. Just have another look. You've got all options available to you. Now, Michael Oliver, through his belligerence and his steadfastness, might well have said, no, I'm comfortable. I still think it's reckless. I actually think he'd have probably had to swallow it and say, now that I've seen it, I can't give a red for this. And he'd have probably downgraded it to yellow. The fact that his colleagues haven't had let's say, the wherewithal to step in is all the more galling, because I think most of the footballing fraternity were like, that's clearly a wrong decision. Now, they've appealed and they've been successful, and I always thought they would be. The only thing I had to worry about, and we'll come on to some of the public reaction and the abuse and all the rest of it after, because I think that's an important part of the story here as well, Ayub, in terms of how that's been, let's say, pushed forward to the front, I would say, in a very cynical way to perhaps deflect attention. But the fact is that this was then reversed. Arsenal were at the mercy of ultimately a Wolves player then getting red carded and Arsenal finding a way to victory. This could have gone very pear shaped and could have gone very, let's say, nasty in some ways. But the fact that Arsenal were just lucky doesn't absolve Michael Oliver for the fact that he's made a horrendous decision. VR's not fit for purpose if they're not stepping in for this type of incident. The fact that the FA then have obviously clearly overruled it and said, yeah, I'm sorry, not the FA, but I think it's an independent panel on which you appeal to. I think some of the other things that have happened there afterwards, Ayub, in terms of David Koo and some of the other stuff we'll talk about. But I just think people often speak about how, and I'll just finish here. I know it's been a long stanza, but people often speak about how Arsenal fans are being too harsh on Michael Oliver. And I get that. You'll get some idiots, obviously, who's going to say things that you shouldn't. You don't go towards family, you don't go towards kids. We know that. You and I know better. Although I've not seen your Twitter recently. But the thing is,
It's much calmer now.
much calmer. I'd be top of the table, aren't you? But the thing is, what I would say though is, you're going to get those idiots at every club. For Gary Neville to start talking on the overlap about how Arsenal fans suddenly talking about a conspiracy theory, the fact that we question Michael Oliver refereeing games in Abu Dhabi and questioning the, let's say, integrity of those type of decisions, as though there's no way on God's green earth that could even be seen as anything but just, I mean, that's normal. There's nothing to be seen here. I always find comments like that very interesting, because I think, well, equally, Arsenal fans don't have any evidence of bias, fine, because you can't objectively prove that. But clearly, equally, I would argue, you don't have any proof unless you see into a man's heart that he's not biased. And that's my argument. And what I've seen recently, when I think about David Koo and how he referenced Jurgen Klopp and what have you, language like that lends itself to a natural human behavior of feeling some form of not ill intent towards Jurgen Klopp. I won't go that far, but you're going to feel as though I don't like him. So I'm not sure how objective and neutral you can be if natural human behaviors, which I don't even necessarily, let's say, criticize him for. It's normal and natural. If you like someone, you're going to resonate towards them. If you don't like someone, you're perhaps going to keep a healthy distance, or even perhaps not curry favor with them, or what have you. So there's a lot to kick around there. I just want to get your thoughts firstly on the decision, the process, because that was clearly a broken process, as was proven a couple of days later. And the fact that we seem to just have glossed over the fact that if it wasn't for a little bit of luck, and remember that Wolves player who got sent off, I'll say it before I say it again, he got a second yellow. He didn't get straight red. He got a second yellow, which is what Arsenal fans were saying Miles Lewis Skelly should have got, which is clearly the case. He should have
Mm,
got a yellow card. In
mm,
the same game, Michael Oliver gives Gomez for what was pretty much a similar challenge, if not a bit more dirty. I think it was a yellow, by the way. Hence, because
mm.
it was a second yellow, he got red carded. If you're showing that level of inconsistency in game, what choice do you have, in a sense, game to game? And I just wonder, again, just want to get your thoughts on the overall story, because for me, yes, maybe it touches me a bit more because I'm an Arsenal fan. But clearly, for me, it was a big story. I think it highlighted some of the shortcomings of the PGMOL, including Howard Webb, and also where Michael Oliver's standing is in the game, because I keep hearing pundits talk about, oh, he's the best referee, he's the best referee, he's the best referee. But I'm seeing time and time again with him as well, as though there's some, I'm not saying arrogance, but clearly he doesn't necessarily make decisions where you think. There was a time when I really did think Michael Oliver, yeah, he is the best. He's a class above. But in recent times, that's not been the case, and I think it's okay to call him out for the mistakes that he's making.
Uh, Obviously, there was a lot to get off your chest, weren't there? So I'm not surprised you wanted to talk about this. Right, first, Michael Oliver and the decision. Uh, it, the fact that it's been rescinded, it's clearly obvious it was an error, and it was a glaring error. And that's why I think a lot of people were agitated, especially the Arsenal fans, and I think football fans in general. Whether you like Arsenal or not, you don't want obvious errors, and this was such an obvious error. Uh, I know Michael Oliver, you're right. He's a bit of a poster boy for the refereeing community. I mean, if memory serves me right, I think it was about 27 when he started officiating in the Premier League, which is incredibly young to be a referee in the best league in the world. So he is high profile. Uh, I I don't know. I mean, it's one where you can think, hang on, this is for a referee of this ability and this standing. It seems to be that he's very rushed. What I would say though is you talked about uh, pulling out the red card immediately. It's one of these things where I'm not sure what my position is, and I'll explain it to you. The more time sometimes you take, the more room there is for doubt. If you make an instant decision, it's calling it as you see it. So in a sense, sometimes it's almost better to make a decision immediately because in a sense you're reacting to what you've seen. If you take a step back, you're trying to replay the incident. And sometimes when you replay the incident, maybe you see other things that will cloud your decision. So in a sense, you may end up making the wrong decision if you take time. So it's one where I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether you want to say an instant decision or a referee taking time. My issue was it was VAR. Now you absolutely are right. If you've got Michael Oliver and you've got Darren England, there is a sense of community within the refereeing world. Uh, there is friendships, relationships, and maybe you don't want to challenge that. Now, I'm an advocate of having that third referee or VAR being managed by maybe somebody from abroad, a referee from abroad who has no uh, uh, dog in the race. So in a sense, they will be independent, even though they're a referee. They're not part of the English refereeing community. So in a sense, if they make a decision, they're not going to be sort of crossing paths with Michael Oliver. Maybe that's the way forward in terms of VAR. If we because that was clearly one where you would have expected VAR to get on the mic and say to Michael Oliver, Michael, do you really want to do you want to see this again? But obviously, the fact that Darren England didn't have really the balls, let me put it that way, to perhaps challenge Michael Oliver, who, in terms of the refereeing community, is obviously much senior, and he's regarded as one of the best. So uh, that to me was where I took issue that I would have expected VAR, but I can understand exactly why Darren England didn't get involved, didn't perhaps communicate with Michael Oliver. Maybe he did, but if he did, he certainly didn't challenge him.
Yeah, but the question is, are you? That's two major faux pas that Darren England has been a part of now. in
Yeah.
terms of VAR. One, for simply not paying attention, and
Mm,
secondly, for not having, in your words, the balls to step in and say, Michael Oliver, I'm sorry, you need to see this again. Now, again, I started my commentary by saying that a lot of times these decisions are vindicated by arguments that fit that particular instance. So I've heard Dermot Gallagher often speak on Monday, Ref Watch, where he says, when going to the screen, the referee still has all the options available to him. And that's
mm,
my point. If that is the case, why can't Down England step in? Now, the problem is, and this is why the whole VAR thing is broken, the argument is that supposedly the referee, when he's going to the screen, has all the options available to him. You can stick with your on field decision, or you can reverse it. He's got it all available to him, right? But there's also this thing now that's crept in, unfortunately, where clearly, if you're being called to the TV monitor, it's because your colleague up in the stands watching VAR on in Stockley Park or wherever it may be, it's pretty much a guarantee that you've made the wrong call.
mm.
So we're
Yeah.
already on the wrong footing over here. That referees, when marching over to the TV monitors in a stadium of 50, 60, 70, 80,000 people, uh, baying for blood in a stressful situation, in what would test even the most strongest human being. Let's be very clear. Often these cameras are near the dugout and all the rest of it, where you're having to then just say, no, okay, I'm going to have the strength and conviction just to watch this again. And I'm not going to be influenced by the fact that I've been called to the monitor, which already tells me I've made a bit of a boo boo over here. That whole process is broken because where Darren England should have been strong enough to think is, Michael, all options available. Come and have a look. And I would hope Michael Oliver, then, having seen it a few times, because look, you're always going to be better informed if you see multiple slow motion replays of the incident, because then you can take a breather, you can take a moment, you get multiple angles. You should always see it in a motion way as opposed to any freeze frames, because freeze frames can be incredibly deceptive. You'll remember the famous Curtis Jones incident with Adrian
Mm. Yeah.
Basuma, when I were very irritated that they were showing a lot of still images, and I think there's been many incidents since. Because both you and I argued that Curtis Jones should never have been sent off, and I think I still stand by that. So, with all of that in mind, that whole process, unfortunately, is broken. I just don't understand it for the life of me. And again, 2 days later, common sense has prevailed. Again, the fact that Arsenal have managed to win a game of football is neither here nor there. Because I genuinely believe if Wolves hadn't gone down to 10 men, Arsenal were not winning that game of football, even though
Mm.
they started the second half
Yeah.
pretty decently. It shouldn't take luck like that to get the referees out of this particular pickle. Now, Ayub, I do want to pivot the conversation a little bit towards the obviously the torrent of abuse that came afterwards on social media, because obviously it was an incident that was highlighted. Arsenal are one of the larger fan bases. Social media is often rife with a lot of nonsense, and a lot of fans will often go overboard. You and I can articulate our footballing views. A lot of others will get onto the old keyboard and start typing all sorts of stuff. What was your thoughts in terms of A, the abuse? Happy for you to comment on that. But B, the fact that that seemed to take over the public airwaves, let's say, for the next couple of days, and what your thoughts were on that. And then obviously extending to whether or not the two situations are related, unrelated. I'll let you make your own call in terms of David Coote now doing the rounds with a lot of interviews about his A, personal life, and B, some of the challenges that he's been facing.
Right. I mean, first on the point of the abuse, that's the world that we live in. I'm not condoning in any way uh, the abuse, but unfortunately, we've got not, and I'm talking about we there is an environment created. But I mean, you look at the politicians that uh, are prominent in the world, creating divisions, creating toxicity. So really, it's to me, it it, it's a reflection of the world that we are living in now. So when somebody says, "Oh, this abuse is awful," this is the world that we are living in. It's been cultivated by prominent leaders. So you reap what you sow. So in a sense, I have no real. Uh, I don't like it. I don't agree with it, but I'm afraid this is the world uh, that 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 we're living in now. It's a reflection of everything that's around us. So it will continue. It's not going to go away. And those who are uh, speaking from their uh, high horses and preaching and saying this is wrong, look at the world. You can't pick and choose and say, really, this is wrong. If you really want to address it, address from a global perspective what's happening in the world, address so many other issues, and maybe that it will rectify itself. But at the moment, you can't address the abuse, especially on social media. I mean, we talk about uh, Elon Musk, we talk about Donald Trump. Donald Trump's putting all sorts of nonsense out there. Musk is putting all sorts of nonsense out there, which is divisive, creates friction, creates toxicity. So on that matter, uh, it's far bigger than than just fans abusing. We've created an environment where uh, people will do this. So on that subject, I'm afraid it's a problem that's going to continue and probably will get worse.
On that, though, I absolutely agree with you. It's part of a larger, and only when you were speaking about some of the things that are happening in the political sphere, for sure, it got me thinking. And you're absolutely right. There's not a lot of harmony, let's say, and there's a lot of factions being formed, right? In terms of, and also some of the narrative and the rhetoric and the language being used. Now, it seems very common. Uh, Before politics was just seen as kind of the posh group just making decisions, running how the country was in terms of when I was a child and I was naive. And now it's just a case of there's a lot of factions, a lot of vulgar language being used, and what have you. And to your point, there's a lot of there's a reflection of that on social media. I mean, look, you're right. This is the world we live in. I don't condone it. I would never call out Michael Oliver on a personal level or talk about his family. Ultimately, family is a sacred line that you simply don't cross. We can have a respectful disagreement and suggest that Michael Oliver made multiple errors, but that's nothing personal. It's just that's the world we live in. It's professional sports, so you've got to be held accountable in a sense for your actions. The one thing I would say though is there's no doubt in my mind that the PGMOL for sure, this is without a shadow of a doubt, we're using some of that to offset and let's say start a different narrative to distract a little bit away from the absolute faux pas that the arguably best referee in England made to then try and garner sympathy for him. And sympathy there is. They're not mutually exclusive, though. You can have sympathy for someone who's having to face such abuse, and from what I hear, there was a lot of abuse for him. I think I do believe you'd have to tell me if I'm wrong, but he refereed I think the United Liverpool game at Anfield. I think he took a lot of abuse then, but it wasn't reported as much. Yet now here it was, lots of journalists being briefed about the social media abuse, and all you could get from Sky Sports, which I often sometimes think is a PGMOL mouthpiece to some extent, was the fact that this has gone too far, and this talk of conspiracy theories. They latch on to those few Arsenal fans who suggest there's a lot going on, who question the credibility of a referee who's going on and taking referee games in Abu Dhabi, and he's sent off Arsenal players at an incredibly disproportionate rate to any other club that he's refereed. And when they suggest that, that just caused some question marks, like Simon Jordan really nicely articulated on TalkSport, we're just raising some question marks about that. The statistics suggest that, and the fact that he's not sent off a Man City player in the last God knows how many matches
Mm.
he's refereed. Um, we raise question marks. And to your point about social media abuse, Ayub, in the olden days, the abuse you would get would be restricted to players for the most part, and yeah, maybe some in the stands, but the referees wouldn't necessarily get as exposed to the fans, right? They wouldn't be known as, let's say, they wouldn't be known outside of football pitches to some extent. Now, with social media and the fact that everyone's got an opinion and everyone can get access to referees and referees' personal details and all the rest of it, you have to ask you now more than ever. I would argue is that you're going to be perhaps more inclined as a referee to form some sort of unnatural bias against some clubs because of perhaps fans abuse that you might be taking all the rest. I'm not saying that exists. I'm just saying the platform and the environment is such where you're receiving such dogs abuse online from certain fans that you'd have to be an absolute, you'd have to be so cold in some ways to not be affected somewhat by some of the nonsense that you read online, perhaps from one group or set of fans, to then not feel some sort of way towards that club in a negative way. I'm saying that's very natural to actually feel that way. So I actually think now more than ever, to your point about independence within the VAR section, at least to exist, I think actually for now is a must. Because I think now more than ever, just extending a little bit, Ayub, about the David Coote thing. Any thoughts on that? I did think that it was interesting that this was a little bit strategically timed. Look, I'm just going to quickly, very quickly give you my thoughts before I let you go. David Cool obviously was let go by the PGMOL after his comments about Jurgen Klopp. I think then he was, let's just say, seen on camera snorting a suspicious substance and all the rest of it. He's now come out. I think he's done a couple of pieces. I think one with Sky Sports, I believe. One, I think, with another either radio show or talk show or sports show. I'm not entirely sure. You'll have to, you might know the details. But he's done a couple talking about how he's come out as homosexual. He's come out as the fact that he's had a lot of challenges, all the rest of it. I did think it was interesting that this was the week of all weeks, as though this was some sort of favor called in by the PGMOL if he ever wants to make it back. I've seen it recently before with Bobby Madley, I think, who made a very a comment that was ill-judged, let's say, and he was, let's say, banished to the sidelines and then brought back as a referee there afterwards. Do you think that the two stories are linked, or do you think that actually they stand independent of one another?
Uh, Again, you the the way things are now, it would be hard to imagine it not being linked. But just on the David Coote point, I mean, uh, I was never. I think what he did or what was exposed, there has to be some sort of repercussion because in a sense you're in the public eye. But ultimately, for me, the first question and the most important question should have been: is he a decent referee? Is he a good referee? Throughout his career, are people reasonably satisfied with his officiating? Because I've never been one where, I mean, it depends on what the crime is. I think what he did, there deserved to be some sort of punishment, but not to deprive a man of his livelihood. Simple as that. As I said, for what he did, yes, it's not. He was very, very outspoken and critical about Jurgen Klopp. But for me, right, has he shown bias throughout his officiating? And if he hadn't, it's absolutely fine
Yeah,
because
but bias is hard to prove, are you? That's my point. Bias is hard to prove. I mean, again, I can point to the Michael Oliver statistics when it comes to Arsenal and Man City and all the rest of it, but fine. It's still difficult to prove. I could scream till the cows come home. This bit I do disagree with you on because the difficulty is, Ayub, he can't referee Liverpool games because the fact is the Liverpool fans will. I mean, you can imagine Liverpool again, one of the most powerful fan bases in the country, alongside Manchester United and a few others. But you can't. The argument I have with you is you can't be calling Jurgen Klopp this and not have some sort of bias against him. Like you can't call someone the C word, Ayub, and then think. But actually, when I referee Liverpool, I can call it as I see it. I'm not sure the two marry. At least not for me.
I don't know. I mean, there is an argument, obviously, that you probably can't. That's probably the position that most people will take. That if you don't like somebody, it will have some sort of certainly I don't know about conscious, but certainly subconscious bias. I disagree. I think if you're a professional, there is absolutely no reason why, and that's why I was saying that. Right, in his officiating, has there been any instances where you could sort of say, "Hang on, there is he's made a decision which is questionable." And maybe that there is some sort of bias. So I'm okay. What obviously it was,
You said he's a professional. Again, I'm with you. But if he was professional, he'd never get caught in a situation like he was,
but but
inebriated
but
and
but
talking in the way that he was. Surely,
but that was it's like in private. I mean, remember, he never thought that was going to be broadcast. That was the thing, because in a sense, if you are with a group of friends or associates and somebody's filming, you're in a state, you're inebriated. Now, if you knew, obviously, if he knew that that was going to be broadcast, he would have never said those things. Many things are said and done behind closed doors or in private. So at the end of the day, all that's happened is that something that he thought he was saying in private has been published, has been broadcast. So that's why that's the caveat that I put in.
the
That all right,
caveat,
how
the caveat, yes, at you. But again, you're arguing that. I'm not suggesting that we call for a man's job. I'm just saying I'm not sure how we could continue. That's the challenge I have because it goes back to it. The integrity of the sport is the most important thing. And if you're caught on camera, he could have been caught on camera saying anything other than the words that he said. But if you're
yeah.
going to single out, uh, and he probably could have got away with it if it was a lower club, I would argue a lower place club. But you can't go after one of the most iconic managers of the 21st century, not just one of the most iconic managers of the Premier League modern day era, of one of the biggest clubs in the world, and think that you're going to get away with it. I mean, it's a misjudgment of the highest order you've come.
It's a misjudgment because it was on video, it was broadcast. But how many times? I mean, Michael Oliver, how many, Dermot Gallagher, Howard Webb. Bim- I'm absolutely sure that in private they've had conversations, they've talked about various characters, and they've probably been even more uh,
Handed.
vulgar in terms of describing certain characters. So, as I said, this was David Coote, who's said something in private, who presumed he said something in private that's been broadcast. Uh, my point is right in terms of his officiating. Is he good? Is he not good? If he's no good, then fine. Uh, you try and do something about that. You either sort of demote him or you take him off the register. Uh,
Yeah. But you know what they've done? That's what I'm saying to you. This is what I call the Peter Mandelson rule, right? You play up, you go sit on the sidelines for a couple of years, and then you come back and you take up another position within the cabinet or somewhere else in the power chambers. I mean, this is what it is, right? They've put him to the side. They've said there's a little bit of heat on right now. Now, obviously, there's going to be quite a bit of sympathy because that's what often is the case within these PR. Look, people might think I'm cynical, but it's just because I see it time and time and time and time again. That's all it is. This story where you say, okay, somebody hits the depths of, losing their profession, losing their livelihood, whatever it may be, hitting so-called rock bottom. Then suddenly there's that redemption story. You've got to be sympathetic because it's the modern day era. So you've got to listen and talk about all the abuse, and he gets the airwaves, and you think across. And by the time, what happens is there's a bit of rehabilitation of his image, there's a bit of rehabilitation of himself. He takes some time out, and then at some point, people forget. And then one of those days when it's a good day to bury bad news, you bring him back into the fold. What's the likelihood that in less than 12 months, I would argue by the start of not maybe next season, but the season after next, that David Coote is refereeing in the Premier League? What do you think are the chances of that?
I agree. I agree. You're absolutely right. I think this is a carefully staged and managed process. There is no question about that at all. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, he obviously had enough uh, credit in the bank with the community, with the refereeing community, where they've obviously uh, put him to one side. Uh, it was obviously quite intense, the furore. Uh, they've thought it's died down sufficiently, and this is a process of reintroducing him back into officiated. No question about that at all. And it is a process. Uh, so that I agree with. I think yeah, I agree with your point of view. I just don't think that what he said was, in my opinion, sufficient for a man to be stripped of his livelihood. Now, you can sort of say, right, if he's critical of a coach of a major prominent football club, will he be biased in terms of when he's officiating that club? I don't think so. I honestly don't think so. I think there are many. I honestly, as I said, I may be giving too much credence and to the profession of refereeing. I think there's a lot of incompetence, but I genuinely, as I said, that's why I asked the question first. What's his officiating like? Has he managed or has he officiated Liverpool games in the past? What was it like? If you can provide evidence to say, right, there it is, it's subtle, but there it is, there is bias, then I will sort of say yes,
it's
maybe.
it's hard to prove bias other than a referee coming out and either being seen to be taking bribes or caught on camera saying, I don't like Liverpool Football Club. And when I referee the games involving Liverpool Football Club, I intentionally make decisions that will hurt Liverpool Football Club. That's the only time you're going to be able to prove bias. That's the point I'm making. The corridor we live in, the corridor that we're operating in here, Ayub, is this where you're never going to be able to prove it. Yet those that suggest there could be something wrong, as though when Gary Neville speaks about the fact that it's an absolute fallacy, it would never happen. Not in this world, not in this wonderful, lovely world that we live in, where everyone gets along and it's all hunky dory. This could never happen. The fact that it's suggested, I'm not again. If you've not got evidence, you're right. Why put it out there into the ether? Nobody's saying. What we're saying is, if you look at the statistics, there's some cause for pause. Simply because Michael Oliver's clearly, you could argue, you can compare multiple incidents where you say, why has he not made that decision? And this justification was given. Yet he's always quick to make these type of decisions when it involves a certain football club. I'm not saying, by the way, that Michael Oliver is biased against Arsenal. What I'm saying is that when someone suggests that's the case, you can't also provide irrefutable evidence that it's also not the case because you can't
Mm.
see what's in a man's heart. And to your suggestion, Ayub, that a referee can't be biased, I genuinely think that's wrong because in this day and age that we live in, we all have some sort of either conscious or subconscious bias that we operate in, day out. And that's the point I'm saying. You don't intentionally go out thinking, if I get a chance to give a penalty against Liverpool today, I'm doing it. I don't care how it looks. But there can be some sort of subconscious bias towards perhaps a manager who might have blasted you, let's say 4 times in a row, the last times you've refereed some of their games. That can creep in, and I would argue it's not even wrong. It's just natural human behavior. What you're suggesting is that the referee is that professional that he just calls it absolutely as he sees it. But I do think subconsciously, depending on what behaviors he's been subjected to from managers, from fans, whatever it may be, I think does sometimes affect a referee's way, perhaps, of the decisions that he might make. I don't think that's such a big stretch.
I mean, the only reason I'm saying what I'm saying, I'm not saying every single referee. I mean, obviously there are biases, but with professional refereeing, it's the biggest show in town. You've got cameras, you've got VAR. So in a sense, it's in the public eye. This is not a small office in Blackburn where maybe you don't like the manager, so you try and I perhaps where maybe decisions you'll make are because you don't like the manager. That's completely separate to the professional football of the Premier League because every decision is scrutinized. You've got Match of the Day, you've got Sky Sport, you've got Gary Neville. All of these people will be talking about it. So you know that. So in a sense, your professional pride, you are a referee. You want to be the best referee. In theory, that's really what your intention should be. You know that this game will be scrutinized, analyzed. You'll have Dermot Gallagher, Howard Webb. All of these characters will look at every decision you make. So that's the reason why I think uh, the bias, whether you like Klopp or whether you don't like Klopp, whether you like Arteta, you don't like Arteta, ultimately you are, when you're refereeing as a referee, you're thinking, right, I want to be the best referee that I possibly can be. This is it's viewed by millions, billions of people. That's the reason why I think that bias, perhaps, if there is a bias, it's submerged because of the need to be the best referee and the obvious reason that this is viewed by billions of people across the world and it's going to be analyzed and scrutinized. That's the reason why I think perhaps it's something that can be put to one side.
The only thing I would say, I will finish on this is I think the only point we disagree on is you're suggesting that because of all the scrutiny and the fact that millions are watching, that ultimately a referee is going to cast aside any bias he has. What my argument simply is that doesn't have to be conscious bias. That's my argument. Because of the environment that we live in, the social media, the abuse that referees take, the various different vitriols that or episodes of vitriol that managers are subjecting referees to. Some of it really tough, some of it just shared in a very professional way. I actually think Mikel Arteta has been. He had that one blow up after the Newcastle goal last year, if you remember, when the ball supposedly crossed the line. There were multiple different issues with that goal. A push on Gabriel at the back, at least in my opinion, from Joe Linton, I think it was. But he blew a gasket. I've always said I'm going to cut managers some slack post game, the post game interview. Emotions are running high. And yes, did he blow a gasket? Yes. Has he learned from that? Yes. He was fairly, I thought, again, Liverpool, Arsenal winning helped, no doubt, temper some of that. But he was fairly measured. He said he was fuming. He said he'll leave it up to the press. He said there's evidence or there's precedent with the Bruno Fernandes situation against Spurs at Old Trafford. But he was fairly well measured. The problem right now is Arteta and Arsenal are catching strays in terms of like the fact that they've got up in arms about the wrong decision as though that's somehow wrong and we should be calling them out for it. FA have charged them, by the way, with regards to harassing the referee. I don't see why that charge is thick. The fact is, the referee was wrong. Of course, it's natural human behavior that they're going to
Mm.
surround him
Yeah, yeah.
because it was the referee's incompetence that put those players in that position anyway. So I don't see what the issue is. Anyway, the point is, we've discussed it at length. We'll probably disagree on
Yeah,
that
yeah.
final
Time to
point.
move on. Time to move on.
Time
Time
to
to move
move
on.
on.
Hopefully, the viewers are still with us. They've probably dropped like flies. Right, we'll talk about football. Just in case you're still with us, we'll talk about football. What I want to talk about now is there's a massive game. Uh, Perhaps historically it wouldn't have been seen as a massive game, but I think it is. And it's a battle of the heavyweights. I think, in my opinion, the two best coaches. Uh,
Don't say it.
dare I say, in world football. So it's Bournemouth versus Liverpool, Slot versus Iriola. Uh, what's your thoughts on the game and the more the battle between the two coaches because they are at the top of their game. Both of the coaches are at the top of their game. Both teams playing really, really well. So, what's your thoughts on that? And sort of, is it something that excites you? I'm really excited because I do like to sometimes see two exceptional coaches pit their wits against each other.
Yeah, I think, look, this is a huge audition when it comes for Anthony Iraola. He is the talk of town. He is my manager of the season, irrespective of the fact that Forest have had a good season with Nuno and Slots obviously coming incredible. I think they will win the Premier League title. And if so, and if he got it, I wouldn't begrudge him that in any way, shape, or form. But Andrea Iraola is the story of the season. Let's be very clear here. And I would argue that win against Forest was arguably the result of the season. And who would have thought that before the season starts, that that would have been perhaps the one result that stood out for many
Mm,
in terms of the thrashing that they handed out to Forest. Don't forget, they went up to St James's, a very difficult place to go to, and beat Newcastle, a resurgent Newcastle 4-1 as well. So that's 9 goals in the last 2 games. But this is the litmus test. This is the best team in the league. This is the team, in my eyes, that will win the Premier League and arguably even the Champions League, especially if you look at the draw that's been meted out. I think there's definitely an avenue there. And they get their just desserts for finishing top of that Champions League format. And I think if you look at the route, Ayub, there's definitely a pathway. I think they're the best team in Europe, so time will tell if they can win the Champions League. But this is the big test. Iriola's the talk of town. They absolutely smacked Forest. Could have been more, had goals disallowed as well. A Forest team that A doesn't concede many, but doesn't concede many chances as well. So to put five past them is incredible. If you remember, they got that draw at Chelsea as well, and they've been going through a few injuries of themselves. Tavernier's been out, Evan Nilsson's been out, and a few others as well. The challenge for Bournemouth will be that if they can somehow miraculously get into Champions League football this year, because I still think it'd be a bit of a miracle. I mean, it's still a long shot because obviously Arsenal are there, City are recovering somewhat. Let's say it'd still be an effort. Let's say for Bournemouth to come to the Champions League. I think it's a bit early to suggest they're shoo-ins, but there's an important period in Bournemouth's uh, a kind of tenure because Champions League football could mean a lot of things. It could mean that they hold on to this hotshot young manager. It could also mean that they are able to strengthen. I think they have the lowest attendance in the Premier League in terms of their
mm.
stadium. So who knows? I don't know if they've got scope to do something about that, but you'd think they might have to if they get Champions League football in terms of playing games, perhaps somewhere else. I don't know what the rules are, but I know there is something about that. But he's the talk of town. He's an incredible manager. You, I know you're a huge fan, so I'll let you wax lyrical about him. The style of football that he's played, his philosophies, the way how he talks about football, how he understands the game. For me, there's no doubt in my mind that he's going to manage a very big football club next. Now, I believe that football club, and some may snigger when I say very, very big football club. I still think that could be Spurs. I think there's still a pathway where that happens. I think Daniel Levy will be looking at this situation very closely. I know Spurs have some important cup games coming, but they've had some tough results recently, Ayub, after we last
Mm.
spoke. Obviously, losing a really bad game at home at Leicester, where confidence, I know they've got injuries. They are playing a few youngsters, but at home to Leicester, they needed to find a win. Ange needed to find a win, and the time will tell, especially with that huge second leg against Liverpool looming large. Levy will be in that position again, Ayub, where
Mm.
days before a League Cup final, does he part ways with the manager?
Mm.
Because
Yeah.
getting rid of Ange, and Ange has a more popular I think fans are on his side a lot more than they were with Mourinho at that time. I believe. I mean, it's hard to gauge. I still think Spurs fans do like him, although they probably feel that the situation is getting untenable, even though they've had an incredibly bad run of injuries, to be fair. So, Iriola, I think, look, a huge opportunity. They've been on a great run. They probably drew a bad result, let's be clear. I'm going to edge towards Liverpool simply because I do think these games when the expectation shifts a little bit, where you think, "Oh, Bournemouth, that'll be perhaps a draw or something like that." I do think Liverpool, just with their class, with their know-how, will be able to pick them apart. And when I say pick them apart, I don't mean necessarily winning comfortably, but I do expect them to win and grind out a victory before they head, I believe, to Goodison next. So, huge game, uh, huge audition moment. And if Bournemouth do win, Ayub, this will be well. It'll probably then be the result of the season. Don't forget they've beaten City there, they've beaten Arsenal there. They now have obviously Liverpool coming up. But it's a huge moment in the Premier League as well. Many still think that Arsenal can still challenge Liverpool. I don't. Maybe I'm just being negative, but I just don't see it. Liverpool are clearly a class above. But opportunity knocks for Iraola, especially, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of the big wigs in European football are also kind of keeping an eye on this game as well, just to see how that goes.
I mean, irrespective of the result, I think you talked about the big wigs or the big clubs. I think they will be hovering. I think Spurs. Uh, it could be. I think you're right. It could be, but I don't think this season. I think certainly. I mean, it's a manager that uh, came onto the radar for me as a Leeds fan because obviously this was a guy that we were courting. He was our number one priority to try and get after we sacked Bielsa. Uh, Now I know why. I mean, there's many things as a football club we've got wrong, Leeds United Football Club, but certainly the scouting must have been right because he was a coach I'd never heard of, and I don't think many people in England had. But whoever scouted Iraola obviously must have known what they were doing because he's been an absolute revelation. I mean, Bournemouth is it's a wonderful story. I mean, it is a fairy tale, and credit to Eddie Howe as well because he was the one that got them from I think League Three was it yeah
Bottom of the
uh
football league.
yeah and you talked about the attendance. It's about 12,000, which is in the Premier League. I mean, that's there are sort of League One teams perhaps with more fans coming to the stadium than Bournemouth, but it's a remarkable story. I think and I'll go back to what their owner did by sort of getting rid of Gary O'Neill, bringing this guy in, but what he's then done it's just been amazing. The transformation. I mean, last season was it was it. There was a bit of a struggle, but that's the whole point of a new manager. I think obviously the famous phrase "trust the process." He was putting the building blocks in place. He was laying the foundation, and this year we're seeing the fruition. They've got some decent players, but they are playing football of the highest level. It's on the front foot. It's free flowing. They're playing as a unit, and that's why I'm really, really looking forward to what happens tomorrow because both sets of teams are high on confidence. They're playing at a high level. They're being coached to a magnificent level. I mean, these are supremely skilled coaches and great tacticians. It's not just a case of right. I mean, Liverpool do have good players. Bournemouth have decent players, but they are playing above and beyond. So that's why I've got so much time for Iriola. Uh, he will be managing a big club in the very, very near future. Don't think this season because same when we went for him, he was quite loyal to the club that he was at. Uh, and I've got a feeling that he'll probably do the same. That if he's going to go, he probably would see out the season and then go.
But I think Ayub, those were slightly different circumstances. And please tell me if I get any of these details wrong. But at the time when Leeds made that approach, and I think it was the time when you then pivoted to getting Jesse Marsh. And again, you'll have to correct me if I'm mistaken in that recollection. But the fact is that he was probably of the opinion that he needed to see what was going to happen with Leeds as well, right? And that's not the case right now. So he was at his club in Spain, and he took the view that I just need to see perhaps what happens with Leeds. And I can't remember if it was that season you went down and all the rest of it. And then obviously he's ended up at Bournemouth because Gary O'Neill kept Bournemouth up. And to think, in a sense, if it wasn't, and I know you often have a go at Gary O'Neill, but I think you will agree with this. It could have gone a different way, right? If Gary O'Neill didn't come in and save Bournemouth and Bournemouth went down, let's say, then
Mm.
perhaps he could have ended up being the Leeds manager. So maybe Bournemouth do have Gary O'Neill to thank in a sense for what is. No, they do in respects, right? Because otherwise, Iriola would have come into a championship club if he chose Bournemouth, right? So anyway, but the point is, look, he's an incredible manager. You mentioned he's going to be at a big club. I agree, without a shadow of a doubt. I think Spurs' time is now, though. I like Ange, I really do. I just think that the situation right now is getting to a point with all the injuries. I mean, you can't be where they are in the table, Ayub. That is,
Mm.
with all the injuries, you'd accept 10th, maybe 11th, but they're languishing in what 15th or somewhere or the other. Europe, that's not great. That's not great in any way, shape, or
Mm,
form. The issue I have, the interesting thing for me is Iriola definitely is a hot shot manager. He's obviously young. He's from the continent. Uh, Again, I'm not saying this is going to be the case because I've not been following the stories too much. But Ancelotti is leaving Real Madrid at the end of the season. What happens if Real win the title, Barcelona don't do anything in the Champions League, let's say, do they get rid of a Hansi Flick? Now suddenly you might have the two biggest clubs or two of the biggest clubs in Europe, especially definitely in Spain, with vacancies. I'm not saying they would look at Areola, but he's from obviously
mm,
Spain. For sure, they'd have a look at him. I mean, without a shadow of a doubt, right? Whether they think he's got the personality to fill those shoes is another question altogether. But he's going to have some conversations with a lot of big clubs because I think when an Iriola comes about, especially the way, like you mentioned, it's Bournemouth, the story, the way he's got them playing, the young players, Kaiva, Semenyo, Tara, obviously even Evan Nilsson when he's fit and healthy, leading the line admirably. He's got a good team there, Kirkes. The worry for him, and I think he will move on regardless, because the worry for him is some of those players are going to get picked off for you. It is
mm,
unfortunately the way it is for those type of clubs because they can't pay players enough to hold them. That's the problem. And they often are in that realm of you get a young player, you build him up, you showcase him to the world, and then you sell him for a decent, pretty penny. You'd have to think they're going to lose Kirkes. You'd have to think they're going to lose at least two or three from Clive, Utara, Semenyo, some of these guys who are taking the Premier League by storm. And that then obviously makes the opportunity or the role all the less appealing because by that time you're also probably getting a lot of overtures from big European clubs. I think this is the last season Bournemouth are going to have for a while in terms of being up there, right up there in the Premier League, because I genuinely think they are unfortunately going to lose their manager and two or three of their best players. But I think this is the way the league always is with, uh, let's call them so-called smaller teams punching way above their weight. It's the perfect storm. You've ended up with a great manager who's
mm,
then hit with everything that he's come up with. But that can only last a certain time because you just know the big clubs are going to be circling. I mean, there's many clubs that could do with a left back like Kirkes.
mm.
And no doubt right now, Clive and some of the others are really taking the Premier League by storm. So, yeah, big audition, big game. Interesting because it's at 3 o'clock UK time. So clearly they didn't see this as they would have liked to have flexed this, I think,
Mm.
into one of the prime time slots for sure. It's definitely arguably the must-see game this week, other than the game at the Emirates. So, yeah, time will tell. I have Liverpool edging it. Are you 2-1? How do you have it?
I hope it's that because obviously I've got a soft spot for Liverpool. So uh, I just think they probably will edge it, but that's more with my heart than my head. I think it will be a really, really uh, good game. Uh, and I think Bournemouth will be more than confident about uh, the visitors of Liverpool coming to their ground because I think they'll full of confidence. So I'm just looking forward to. I think it's going to be a cracking game. I hope it is a cracking game because it's showcasing two of the best managers in world football. Before we move on, I'm just going to add as well. When Iriola turned us down, the next one we went for was Slot. And he turned us down as well. So at least we were eyeing up the best managers in the
Yeah, but I
business. But
mean, yeah, all's well that ends well. I mean, you ended up with.
Right. Okay. I'm just going to quickly indulge you. You sort of alluded to Arsenal and City. We've had over an hour, so obviously the fans or our viewers are probably half asleep by now. So I'm going to give you about 2 or 3 minutes to talk about Arsenal City, and then tell me what the result will be.
Well, I'll take 2 minutes, so you can take 15 seconds to talk about the Turf Moor game. Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, it's a big game. I mean, in the end, Arsenal, obviously, if they have any faint hopes of challenging Liverpool for the Premier League title, they've probably got to win this game. And those are the situations that you don't want to find yourself in because these are games where you normally just want to take a point and crack on. Such is the standard and quality that Liverpool have put forward and the missteps that Arsenal have had in amongst some of the difficult circumstances with injuries and so forth. They probably have to win this game against a Man City team that's difficult to know what to make of. They're rebranding themselves, I guess, currently with a few additions. They did well to recover from a very sluggish start against Chelsea, a game Chelsea probably will be kicking themselves. But again, give City credit for turning that around. They've obviously then got themselves into the playoff games in the Champions League, although they now face Real Madrid for a place in the real knockout, so that'll be tough for both teams. But yeah, I think it's a game that Arsenal, I guess, have to win. They've still got a few issues, obviously, no Saka, still no Ben White. I do think their best chance. Of silverware, albeit it will be incredibly tough, will still probably be the Champions League, where if they can get through to the quarterfinals, that's a timeline where perhaps Saka and others might be back. So that could be interesting. It looks like they're going to end the January transfer window without a striker, although they obviously did make a bid for Ollie Watkins. But big game, tough game. I don't think Arsenal will win. They've had difficulty beating City generally anyway. I know they won there last year. I just think this City offers. Obviously, I don't think City are going to challenge for the Premier League title. I think they've got a lot of issues still. But the type of teams that hurt City are those that can get at them with pace. And right now, I'm not sure Arsenal have that direct threat. Let's say that maybe even Chelsea posed in the early parts of last weekend. So I'm probably going to go for a score draw. I think that's probably where it'll be.
All right, okay, right. I won't talk about Leeds Burnley because that was an insult to football. That was an absolute embarrassment. Uh, Happy enough with a point, but that's all I want to sort of say because it really was absolute rubbish.
Yeah, but you often speak about how Burnley, I think the phrase that you used was they've got the right formula, do they? I mean, you're top, they're not. You score tons more goals than Burnley do. Yes, they've got an incredibly stingy defense, and it may well still get them to the Premier League. I just don't know if they've got the right formula. Clearly, Leeds have a better formula, no?
Well, I mean, it's not much of formulas because I mean, for us, it's just that we've got good players, and those good players, uh, on the whole, in a very poor championship, will play better because they're better players than most of the championship. So, and they'll score goals. That was a game between two coaches, absolutely petrified to lose. Tactically, it was just right. We'll just defend. We'll not really be brave. We'll pass side to side, and that's two coaches who are 1 and 3.
But
That just shows
hang
how
on.
poor the league is.
Yeah, hang on. You said you'd take a point before the game. So if the manager,
Yeah, but I wanted some intent though. That was the problem. There was
yeah,
absolutely no intent,
yeah, but
and we were the
the intent will get you beat.
Well, no. I think if Fark had actually been a better coach, then he would have sort of said, right, we've got better players. You're much better than Burnley. Go on the front foot. Uh, Test them. They've not been tested all season. We're going to test them.
Just very quickly, just tell me. I mean, I could be wrong. You probably didn't watch the game. You were too nervous to. But I mean, the first half, I think Leeds did have the better of it, didn't they not?
Uh, do you know the first shot on target was 88 minutes? And
That's
that's
not
how,
that's
that's how, at
enough.
least we won that battle because it was Dan James. Uh,
Enough said.
yeah. So let's move on. Right. We've gone on for over an hour. So hopefully there's still about 2 or 3 viewers still watching, who obviously have nothing better to do. But thank you so much. Have a great weekend. Take it easy. If you're in the UK, like most of us, it's going to be not too bad a weekend. It's not going to be too cold. For OS, it's about 20 odd degrees. So enjoy your weekend. All right. So until the next time, see you soon. Ta-da.